Glenda Dawson, and I have Moongirl here with us, and you're watching the Paranormal Dolls. We are here every single week, and you could find us at the Glenda's Magical Creations channel, at the Conscious Awakening Network, on Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and so many other streaming platforms. So, Sarah, my
Hey,
little girl, how are you?
I'm great and excited about our guest.
Yes, yes, me too, me too. You want to introduce him? Go ahead.
Yes, he's a dear friend of mine. He's amazing. Travis Shortt. Yay.
Thank you guys so much. It is a pleasure to be with you. Been looking forward to this, I guess, for about a week and a half, I think, is when Sarah reached out to me. And always a pleasure to be in the company of two beautiful souls and two beautiful individuals. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And always fun to talk about the subject that we're going to look at here this afternoon, which is Mothman.
Mm-hmm. So I'm sure our audience wants to know a little bit more about you. And so take it away.
Let's see. My background is so bizarre. So currently what I do for a living, I'm kind of starting now and go back. I am a public relations consultant, which really feeds into my background. I started in broadcasting. Actually, September will be 31 years that I started in radio. And then I went into television and then ad agency and then marketing and public relations for a hospital. And then worked for some film companies and things like that. And it was actually working for Black River Films that we did this project that we're going to kind of talk about a little bit today, which is Dark Wings, the Mothman Chronicle, which is the first feature-length documentary that was ever done on Mothman. There had been these small segments, Unsolved Mysteries, and some, it had been part of these anthologies. And so in 15 minutes, 30 minutes, things like that, we went for a feature-length documentary looking at everything that was happening in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, at the sightings of Mothman. And so my background is really marketing, public relations, broadcasting, advertising, thunder. No, that's not me. So I wish I were Thor, the god of thunder. That would work, but that one I can't do that one. Also trained early on and served as a minister, as a Southern Baptist pastor for a while. And in doing that, I also did chaplain work with the Sheriff's Department and hospice. And so really had a lot of interactions with individuals who were near death, dying, a lot of spiritual counseling and things like that. And so a lot of that I brought to the table when we were doing this documentary on Mothman, because there were so many things that were taking place there in Point Pleasant in the 60s and continuing today and other locations around the world that where these winged entities have been cited. Right now, kind of where I am in my life, I'm still doing the PR consulting. I've got some clients, got a film company in LA I work with. I've got a political client in Texas I'm working with. I've got two nonprofits in the state of Kentucky that I handle. So I stay busy doing that. I'm also a full-time graduate student at East Tennessee State University, working on my master's in brand and media strategy. So I'm kind of all over the place and still do these interviews talking about Mothman and the Dark Wings documentary and kind of where we left it off and what we want to do with it in the future. And there's been some struggles and some ups and downs and things like that. And kind of we'll talk a little bit about that today as well, because I've had a lot of people reach out recently, want to know about where they can get the film and what's going on, because we talked early on about there being a series of documentaries, not just what we did in the first one, but continuing it into looking at other aspects of these sightings, especially in Point Pleasant and other places around the world, and in different cultural, religious, and spiritual perspectives and things like that. So it's been interesting. We started the process in 2001 is when we became aware of Mothman in Point Pleasant. We started the documentary in 2003. It took us 6 years to finish it. It was privately funded through myself, Charlie McCracken, and Matthew Fleming, who was the co-producer and one of the researchers. He and I did the bulk of the research. I wrote the script. I hosted the documentary, Charlie directed and shot it, but we funded it out of pocket, so it took a little bit of time to do that.
Right.
And we spent a lot of time in Point Pleasant and have a lot of good friends there that we made to this day. And funny story, I went back for the first time. Last time I was there was 2009. For the premiere of the film, I took my daughter and her squad, which was like this nightmare trip with a bunch of teenage girls, to Point Pleasant for my daughter's 16th birthday. That's what she wanted to do. So we went and spent an entire weekend up there and let them retrace, and took them to all the spots where I had shot and where I had interviewed people and told them the history and got them involved and things like that. It was fun, but you can imagine what it's like with, like 16-year-old girls trekking all over the town of Point Pleasant and the TNT area and things like that. It was fun. My favorite thing is, as soon as we crossed into West Virginia, and I don't know how long they had it queued up on one of their phones, but they played John Denver's Country Roads, and they started singing to the top of their lungs as soon as we crossed the state line going into West Virginia. So
fun times.
Fun times. Yeah, it was great. We really did have a good time. And it was great getting to see a lot of folks that I hadn't seen at that point since 2009. So, it's been almost 10 years.
Wow. So what got you interested in wanting to go forth with this documentary?
By the way, the coffee cup is Mothman. You can pick these up at the Mothman Museum in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Jeff Walmsley, good friend of mine, runs the museum and is also the person who established, one of the individuals that established the Mothman Festival, which will be taking place in September, by the way. And I tell everybody this: if you want a fun road trip for a weekend, really inexpensive, go to Point Pleasant for the Mothman Festival. Everything is free. The only thing that you actually have to pay to do there is the hayride through the TNT area. Everything else is entirely free. It's just basically a street fair.
Right.
And it's just
We gotta head out there, Glenda.
It is. Hey, if you guys go in September, I'll be more than happy to meet you and give you firsthand tour of the area and things like that. It's a really fun experience. So we became aware of Mothman. When I say we, that was Charlie McCracken and myself. And Charlie and I had been good friends and business partners for many years. We met. I was a student at Mountain Empire Community College in Big Stone Gap, Virginia, and Charlie, at the time, was working for the Virginia Foundation for Arts and Humanity, which was based in Charlottesville, Virginia, at the University of Virginia. And he was doing a set of documentaries, oral tradition in the Appalachian Mountains. So he was going and videoing individuals who had stories to tell about the early days in the coal camps of Virginia, and getting that recorded and then submitted to the archive so that it was there. So he and I met in that kind of context. That would have been 93. And became just really good friends. And then a couple of years later, we began working for the same company. Didn't know it. I had been brought in to head up the sales division. He'd been brought in to head up the creative division. So we both ended up working together in that capacity. And our friendship and business partner relationship lasted from 1993 until about 2013. We had a little bit of a falling out in 2013, which is why the documentary film itself has not been available for a little while, because he owned the rights to the footage, but I owned the rights to the script and everything else that had been done. So we had this little bit of a falling out. And unfortunately, Charlie passed away in 2019. So when he passed away, luckily, and I'm very thankful, we at least had started talking again, and we've been able to kind of mend that falling out that we had had. But when he passed away, everything reverted back to me. So I now have the footage. I have the finished documentary. I have all of the footage that we shot. And what we shot literally was 6 years worth of shooting. We were doing recreations, interviews, things like that. But he and I at the time were managing an advertising agency, and we were in Las Vegas because we had an office in Las Vegas. We had an office in Virginia. And I love Vegas. I really do. I mean, it feeds into my Rat Pack, Dean Martin, Frank Sinatra persona that I love and have. But we would be out there for like 14 days straight. And Vegas is one of those places, at least for me, after about 7 days, I've had my feel of the lights and the casinos and the late night dinners and things like that. So we would always drive out into the desert and find ghost towns, and we would just find these really bizarre places and just walk around and clear our heads and things like that. And on our very first trip to Vegas, which was in October, of 99, we drove up. No, I'm sorry, it was October of 2000. We drove up to Rachel, Nevada, which is where Area 51 is. And
Mhm.
while there, we picked up a book by Jerome Clark, and it was all of these stories from every state. So there were 50 states, 365 stories of oddities and paranormal activity and things like that. And one of the stories was about the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And so we're driving back to Las Vegas. It's about a 90-minute drive. I'm driving, he's reading. We get to that and we realize, it's West Virginia. Well, we're in Virginia, and Virginia and West Virginia at one time were the same state. And so Charlie's favorite thing to do was to have road maps. This was before GPS and all of that. So he pulled out a road map, and he was looking while I'm driving, and we realized that where we live in Virginia and where the Mothman sightings took place were less than 3 hours apart.
Wow.
So we made this mental note: one day we're going to take a trip. Fast forward a couple of years, and we were actually shooting a documentary film in Ashland, Kentucky, and we realized at that point we were about an hour and 15 minutes away from Point Pleasant. So we just, at the time, I was married, he was married. We called our wives, like, we'll see you guys tomorrow. We're making a detour. So we drove to Point Pleasant, met some people, started talking to them, and realized there was a story here. Not just the Mothman story, but there was this story of a town and the resilience and the tenacity of human nature, because you had all of these things taking place, the collapse of the Silver Bridge, and how it impacted this town. And yet this town is still moving forward. They're still growing to some degree. They're surviving, at least, if not thriving, they're at least surviving. And we just fell in love with it. And so we decided at that point we were going to start this project, and it became a side project because we had these other things that we were doing. And then in 2003, we had sold the ad agency, negotiated that. We had nothing but time and a little bit of money on our hands. So it really became a passion. So it's like, we're going to focus on this. We haven't done anything creative for ourselves in a very long time. So let's jump into this and let's make this our project. And we've got Matthew involved. And Matthew's actually my cousin. And so he's big into cryptids. His thing is Bigfoot. He's a big Sasquatch, Bigfoot enthusiast. But he really got involved in the Mothman as well. So we really started jumping into this and scheduling interviews and trying to get some of the original eyewitnesses and doing recreations and a lot of CGI. And it's really fun when you watch documentaries and you see some of these productions and you're like, wow, that's so much work all these people have done. Well, it's really a lot of work when there's only 3 of you doing it. When you've got 3 of you researching and writing and hosting and doing the CGI and reshoots and all of that, it really becomes this endeavor of love. And literally, I can say that I poured my heart, blood, soul, tears, marriage, a couple of different things all went into this documentary, and not all of it came out. So it's not sure I came out whole, but it was a fun endeavor. And like I said, it started spurring these other questions. And that's one of the things I love about the paranormal is I don't really think we're ever going to find an answer, but it really, every time we think we're finding an answer, what we really do is find more questions to ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for me, that's the journey. I want to keep asking those questions. I want to keep digging deeper. And I've got a good friend and a client in Ohio, Lee Allen, and his wife, Patty, and they've got a paranormal investigation team that I do a lot of work with. And their slogan is always keep looking into the unknown. And I think that is something that is very, very true in this field. I don't think we're ever going to get any of those answers, not right now. I think at some point there's going to be this moment where all that becomes very clear to us when we become one with the universe or a force or whatever your particular worldview is. Then I think all things will become known. But I think part of what makes us human is curiosity, wanting to ask questions, wanting to understand, wanting to know. What makes us intelligent human beings is if we're willing to actually ask the question and wait for an answer, but not expect one based on our own perspective and our own prejudices. And that was very interesting going in, because when we went into Mothman, each of us had a very different perspective of what we were looking at. So Charlie went in with a very, very supernatural kind of perspective. Matthew, he's a special investigator with, well, anyway, we'll say special investigator. He's law enforcement. We'll leave it at that. But his background is environmental science, so he went in looking at it from almost a mutation standpoint. What could have happened at the TNT area with all of the chemicals that have been stored there during World War II. And I went in having the background of religion and Christianity and spirituality with a very spiritual perspective, and going in thinking, are we dealing with something that is demonic in nature? Are we looking at something that could be very, very evil and very, very malevolent? And so we went in with these perspectives, and then what we came out with was absolutely no answer whatsoever, and even more questions than when we went in, which is one of the things I loved about the whole process.
Sounds like you guys had a lot of fun doing it.
We did. We had a lot of interesting experiences too. We never saw Mothman, and that's one of the questions I always get. Did you ever see him? No, we never did. Yeah. But we did have a lot of interesting experiences. Point Pleasant is a very interesting place. It's actually situated at the joining of the Ohio River and the Kanawha River, and which is actually where the point comes from. It's the point where those two waters meet. And as both of you, I'm preaching to the choir here, the convergence of two strong bodies of water typically create a lot of supernatural phenomena, right, and open a lot of energy. So in Point Pleasant, you had Mothman, you had UFO sightings, there were men in black, there were poltergeist activity, there were haunted houses, there was cattle mutilation, animal mutilation, occult activity. It was like in this little town of 5,000 people, you had every possible supernatural paranormal occurrence that you could think of, all going on right there. And actually, John Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies, went to Point Pleasant not to investigate Mothman, but he actually went to investigate UFO sightings. That's what took him there. So while we were there, we came upon this. We had seen it every trip because the TNT, which is where the Mothman sightings took place in '66, is about 10 miles north of Point Pleasant, and it's a huge, massive footprint of. It's now the McClintock Wildlife Preserve. So some people camp there. There's some fishing and things like that. It's just this huge area that is kind of undisturbed. But in the 40s, it had been an actual military installation in Point Pleasant. And for the manufacturing, this is fun because I had to learn to say this word over and over again. Trinitrotoluene. You know how much fun it is to try to say that? I like calling it TNT. That's the abbreviation. But they manufactured it. They stored it there. There's these igloos that store all kinds of chemicals and explosives. And we've actually been in several of them. And actually in 2010, one of them exploded during the Mothman Festival. It's still very dangerous to go out there. But we would drive up there and we did a lot of shooting. We did a lot of interviews up there. But we kept passing this building. It was this 3-story brick structure off in the field. It was all alone, nothing around it. Really creepy looking. So obviously it attracted our attention. So we decided to go and tour it one day. And we went in, it was full of graffiti, obviously, vagrants had been living there. There were empty liquor bottles and cigarette cartons and things like that. Very long hallway, staircases, just this massive complex. And what we discovered, it had been a mental institute at one time. And it had actually been several things. It had been a mental institute, it had been an orphanage, but it had been built in the 1920s. And it was still engraved on the front of the building, the Lakin State Hospital for the Criminally Insane Colored Boy. So it actually had this very interesting history for how it had been built. And then it had become a mental institute, then it became an orphanage, and then it had been shut down. The most active haunted location that I've ever been in. Doors would open and close by themselves. You could hear screams. You would hear footsteps. You would hear all of this just white noise around you, cold spots, gray shadow people. And that's just on the first floor. And then you would go up and it was just it was bizarre. And so we went there several times. And actually, we're working on a separate documentary for it. When we went back in 2009, we drove out to see it. Totally gone. The building was gone. And you guys are well aware, if you tear down a building, there's always like some footprint. There's something that it's been there. We had seen it in 2008.
Mm-hmm.
It was not there in 2009. There was nothing in this field to ever let you think that anything had stood there. There was no footprint whatsoever that a building had been there, that anything, it was just pristine, covered over, totally done away with. But as we started researching it, it was actually on the registry in the state of West Virginia as one of the most haunted locations. And had just a horrible history. When it was an orphanage, they actually were doing unsanctioned ice pick lobotomies on the children, and a bunch of the children were dying. And so they were burying them in unmarked graves on the property. And that's what we picked up on a couple of videos when we were there, were children screaming. We heard women screaming. We heard pain. We heard anguish. It was, at the time when we were doing it, it was kind of fun. And it was interesting and it was intriguing. And then it just became very depressing, and it began sucking the life of all of us. That had really started taking its toll on each of us. But, and then we heard some things. We were in the TNT area one day. It was in July, August, very hot. Point Pleasant's a lot like New Orleans. It's a river town, so it's very humid. It's very hot. Windows were rolled up. Air conditioner was going. We're at the very heart of the TNT area, and we're at a three-way stop. And we're sitting there waiting on a car to pass, and then all of a sudden there's this sound. And the only way I can describe it is it was a cross between a human scream, a lion roaring, a bear growling. It was just this otherworldly sound that literally caused the windows in the SUV that we were in to shake.
Wow.
And the three of us looked at each other, and we were kind of trying to ascertain, did we all hear that? Or, and we did. All three of us heard the same thing. And we looked at each other, and there was total silence, and we just turned the vehicle around, and we drove back into town. And we immediately went to the liquor store, and we bought the largest bottle of scotch that they had. And we went back to our room, and we just drank, and we talked about what we had heard, what we thought we had heard, right, how it affected us, how it impacted us, and what that meant, and how that was going to come into play while we were doing this documentary. So a lot of fun experiences while we were there. As I said, a lot of great friends, Jeff Wamsley, Carolyn Harris, who had Harris's Steakhouse, which in the Mothman movie, the Mothman Prophecies with Richard Gere and Laura Linney, it's the restaurant that he's in when he's watching the news story about the airplane crash and all of that. That's patterned after Harris's Steakhouse. Carolyn passed away, I want to say 2016 or 2017, she passed away. But was one of those individuals from Point Pleasant who had been totally and personally impacted by the collapse of the Silver Bridge, because her son and husband were on the bridge when it collapsed, and they were two of them that lost their lives. And so for us, that was really the compelling piece to the story. Yes, the supernatural is fun, and the paranormal, and this whole, is Mothman encrypted? Is it interdimensional? Is it demonic? Is it a spiritual being? What is Mothman? But what really began selling us on this whole story was the people, the human side of the story. Because if you look at the smaller pieces that have been done on Mothman, they focus on that, the sensational, supernatural, paranormal side of it. They don't really delve into how did it impact the people that lost loved ones in the collapse. How did it impact the people who had these sightings? Nobody followed them months and years down the road to see how this impacted them. By the way, it impacted them very negatively. There was nothing positive that anybody ever had happened to them after the sightings of Mothman. So we wanted to really delve into it and look at that, and then also look at it from an economic standpoint of when the bridge collapsed, what did that do to this town of Point Pleasant? So there's kind of three components to the documentary film. There's the supernatural, the paranormal, which obviously is the fun angle. That's the book. There's what impacted the individuals' lives on a daily basis, and then in the future. 40, 50 years down the road, what was this doing to their lives? And then the third part of it was, what did it do to the town? And that's not often looked at, because you have really in the U.S. you've got two towns in particular that have had supernatural events. Roswell being one of them with the UFO crash in 1977, Kecksburg, Pennsylvania being the other in the 60s with the crash of the craft there. And if you look at both of those towns, what happened is they were divided. There was a group of people that said, yes, it happened. There was a group of people that said, no, it did not happen. And the same thing was true in Point Pleasant. And that was what we found very interesting. And on our very first trip to Point Pleasant, we stopped at the Mason County Tourism Office and to try to get some information. And the girl that was working behind the desk that morning, she laughed at us when we asked about Mothman. She goes, we don't talk about that here. She goes, if you want to find out there's some crazy people on Main Street, you should go talk to them. And that was exactly what she told us. So, being interested, we went to talk to crazy people. That's where I'm going to go. I mean, I want to go talk to
our
the people.
Yes.
Exactly. We got to stick together. So
Absolutely.
we went and started talking to Jeff Walmsley and Carolyn Harris and Charles Humphreys, who was over economic development. And those people were embracing Mothman. And this was, at this point, this would have been early 2003. And this would just have been 2 years after they had started the Mothman Festival, because the very first festival had been held in September of 2001, just after 9/11. So they did the first festival, September 2001. And it would, like any small town that was trying to get something started, they were met with resistance and things like that. It was grown. And the last time that we attended in September of 2009, there was about 10,000 people that had come from all over the world. You go to this festival, you're going to meet people from Australia, from Germany, from the UK, from Mexico, from Spain. I mean, they come from all over the world to have their picture taken with the Mothman statue, to go to the museum, to go.
That's on the bucket list, Glenda. I need a picture with the damn statue. I was so jelly when I see him with the statue. I'm so jelly. I was like, I need a picture with the Mothman statue.
It is a beautiful piece of design. It really is. And this is one of those. It was a point of contention. It's a beautiful piece of design and an interpretation. It does not fit the eyewitness sightings, and none of them do. Nobody ever actually has done any type of depiction that was true to Linda Scarberry and the early eyewitnesses' accounts. And the whole term Mothman, I hate using it because a reporter from the AP is the one who coined the term. And it was back in the 66, 67. So it was when the Batman TV series with Adam West was hugely popular. So they said, we'll call it Mothman. There was nothing insect-like or moth-like or anything about the original eyewitness descriptions of those individuals that saw this entity that was winged, had red glowing eyes.
Well, since we're going back on that, can you maybe give us a little bit of the background for those who are not familiar with the Mothman sightings?
Absolutely.
How all this began?
So the quote-unquote original sighting took place on November 15th, 1966 in the TNT area. TNT area at the time.
We're making you say the whole word. You have to say the whole word.
Trinitrotoluene. Do not make me say that again. You have no idea how many times I screwed that up when I was recording the voiceover for this thing.
I wouldn't be able to say it, so I believe you.
Oh, it was horrible. But in the 40s, it had been this military installation where they were manufacturing trinitrotoluene. There's your second one. And storing it in these igloos. By the 60s, it was totally abandoned. It had been reclaimed by nature. And it was now the site of the Mason County Fairgrounds.
Okay.
It is also, if anybody that watches and listens is familiar with Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, we're mountain states. So there's a lot of curvy roads, a lot of winding country roads, things like that. That's true in Point Pleasant. There's like one straight stretch of road, and that's in the TNT area. And that's where the teenagers would go on a hot rod race. They would get out there and they would race. And that was actually why Linda Scarberry and her husband Roger and another couple, the Millettes, were out there. They were a teenage couple. They were out parking, making out, racing cars, things like that. That night, they witness what has become known as Mothman. Again, November 15th, 1966. Linda Scarberry was the first one to make a report to the Mason County Sheriff's Department. What she described was a very slender but muscular man, 7 to 9 feet tall, ashen in color, red glowing eyes, and what appeared to be angel wings protruding from his back.
Okay.
And he was caught in a wire from the abandoned power plant. There was a north power plant and a south power plant. They were the north power plant. His wing was caught in one of these wires, and they were watching it struggle to get itself loose. They were terrified. They were in a 57 Chevy that belonged to Roger. They immediately left the TNT and drove back to Point Pleasant, again, 10 miles away. They were driving south, and they were doing in excess of 100 miles an hour. And this entity, this winged entity, was chasing them. It was flying after them. And they were, it was scratching at the 57 Chevy, by the way, which as a lover of classic cars, I find appalling. And that this entity would scratch up a 57 Chevy. But it did. It scratched up Roger's 57 Chevy. They got back to town. They made their police report. Now, they had also, on the drive back to Point Pleasant, saw the carcass of a large dog on the side of the road. And that's important because while the original eyewitness reports are November 15th of 66, there was an event that occurred on November 14th of 66 in a neighboring town. Local farmer Merle Partridge lost his German Shepherd dog. There was something in the field, red glowing orbs that the dog had seen, and the dog immediately went and chased it. The dog's name was Bandit. Bandit was never seen again. So there's a connection between some Mothman investigators that what the Millettes and the Scarberry saw on the side of the road could have possibly been the carcass of Bandit that had gone chasing what turned out to be this winged entity. Now, I'll come back to that in a second because I was the presenter at the Mothman Festival from 2004 to 2009, and I was the first to actually posit a theory that there were more than just one winged entity that was being seen, because there were multiple accounts, over 100, many times coming into the police departments at the same time from different locations. But so I think what was happening there was a manifestation of some sort of these winged entities, not just one, but multiples. And this continued. These sightings continued for 13 months. A lot of people pay a lot, people into numerology and things like that focus on the 13. November 15th, 66, December 15th of 67 is when the sightings supposedly stopped in Point Pleasant. What happened on December 15th of 67 was the Silver Bridge, which connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and Gallipolis, Ohio, which is directly across the Ohio River. It's about a 2-mile bridge that spanned the Ohio River. At 5 o'clock on the 15th of December 1967, the stoplights on both ends of the bridge stopped working, and they stopped on red. So you had both lanes of the bridge piled with cars. Again, right before Christmas, people were doing their Christmas shopping. They were going to eat. It was into the workday. The bridge was packed. There were 46 lives that were lost on that one day. The bridge collapsed. Individuals were dropped into the cold December waters of the Ohio River. 46 people died. There were 2 bodies that were never found. That collapse is what really brought international spotlight onto Point Pleasant, and is what actually brought Mothman international recognition, because people started tying Mothman, the sightings, with the collapse of the bridge, and then there were UFO sightings, and then people had seen men in black, and all of these different things happening. We actually spent a lot of time in the morgue of the local newspaper. The bridge collapsed December 15th of 67. One of the last funerals, because they kept dragging bodies from the river. They dragged bodies from the river for over 6 months. Last funeral wasn't until the summer of 1968. this town was thrust into the international media. There were stories in Japan. There were stories in the UK. It was everywhere, Australia. It actually spurred an entire governmental inspection of every bridge in the United States. Johnson immediately shut down bridges that were similar in structural design of the Silver Bridge, and began looking at the structural integrity of these bridges to make sure that something like this had never happened. Because at this time, it was one of the greatest domestic calamities and tragedies that ever happened on U.S. soil.
Mm-hmm.
So that bridge collapse actually did a lot more than just bring the spotlight to Point Pleasant and infrastructure in the U.S. and road safety and all of that. But that 2-mile stretch of bridge literally cut Point Pleasant off from the rest of the world. Because what had been a 2-mile drive across the river, now if you were in Point Pleasant and you want to go to Gallipolis, you had to drive 10 miles north, cross another 2-mile bridge, and drive 10 miles south. So you had a 22-mile one-way trip just to go to a restaurant or just to go to shop. That was the main thoroughfare from West Virginia to Ohio. So all the trucks, all of the traffic, everything that was economically important and impactful to this area got diverted and sent different places. So, and it took them over 10 years to rebuild a bridge. So they went 10 years with this isolation. So even when we were going in the early 2000s, and even to this day, what you see is all of the economic development was on the Ohio side of the river. That's where all of your franchises, your chain restaurants, chain hotels, your Walmarts, all of that is on the Ohio side. Point Pleasant is still locally owned mom and pop businesses that have tried to survive since the collapse of the bridge. And they've done a very good job of doing that. There's some businesses that have still been in existence since the collapse of the bridge. And so, when we would go up, there's one hotel in Point Pleasant. It's the Lowe Hotel, beautiful historic hotel, beautiful, wrought iron balconies that look out on the Ohio River and things like that. It was just a little too steep for our blood when we were funding this entire project ourselves. So we would go and stay in Gallipolis at what was called the Blue Fountain, which is where John Keel would stay when he would go up and do his investigation. So we wanted that tie to John Keel as well. We wanted to stay where John Keel had stayed and things like that. Funny story on Gallipolis, because it's spelled Galliopolis. And so we had this debate going on when we kept going up is how you pronounced it. So we're in Gallipolis one day and we pull into a BP gas station. And it was an old BP gas station, self-serve still. And old guy comes out, chewing tobacco in his mouth, putting gas in the car, cleaning the windshield for us. And I get out and I said, appreciate what you're doing for us. I said, we're just coming through visiting. I said, can you tell me how to pronounce where we are? And he just looked at me and he went, BP. True story. He got me there.
He got you.
I didn't say how to pronounce the town. How do you pronounce where we are? So
yeah.
But that started everything. Now, there are stories going back to the early 60s of individuals that saw winged entities as well. There was a mother and her son on a neighboring farm in Point Pleasant that saw what the son described as an angel in their barn. There were some individuals digging a grave late one evening, and they saw a similar thing. They saw a winged entity there. In their account, it lifted off of the ground in flight, not unlike a helicopter takes flight. So the wing began to rotate and to flap, and then it just kind of elevated itself, and then it flew off. So there's some very interesting stories that predate the original sighting, but it was the Scarberry Millette sighting that really set things off there in 1966 and 1967.
So you now have basically the whole all the rights to it.
I do, yes.
And what do you plan to do with it?
I'm just going to stick it on the shelf. No,
Wow.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Like, no, you
No,
can't.
no.
Yeah.
So the plan has been Matthew and I, of course, as I mentioned, he's my cousin, and we grew up together, and he and I actually played golf last week, and we had a very long conversation on the golf course. The plan is to it's kind of a tiered process. What we want to do is make the original documentary available for individuals to see as it was released
Right.
at the Mothman Festival in 2009. And we were, we had a very successful run there. We did a great premiere at the theater there on Main Street, and it was actually supposed to be one showing on a Thursday night. It turned into 2 showings on Thursday, 2 showings on Friday, and 2 showings on Saturday. And then we ended up doing another premiere in Virginia. A friend of ours owns a series of theaters, and he let us do the premiere there. Point Pleasant was fun because we did the red carpet thing. Everybody dressed up. There was the after party. It was just this nice to do and things like that. So the plan is to take that original documentary, make it available again, because like I said, it's not been available since, I'm going to say probably 2012, 2013. A lot of people ordered, a lot of people got copies, a lot of people want copies. We just haven't been able to do that. So now that we've got the original documentary back, I've been looking at companies that can mass produce it and the DVD covers and cases and things like that. So the plan is to make it available. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is to create a newer version of the documentary that would actually include a tribute to Charlie McCracken. As I mentioned, Charlie passed away in 2019. So what I want is release the documentary as it was, but with additional footage, behind the scenes, a lot of pictures. There's outtakes.
Right.
Me trying to say trying, and then cussing when I can't get it right. Screwing up on camera stuff. We want to include all of those kind of bonus special features in. And then the third phase is to actually move forward with the sequel, which had been in the works in 2009 and 2010. And that was to actually take the presentation that I did at the festival, which was looking at Mothman through a different lens, from a spiritual and religious perspective, but not any one religious perspective, looking at it from more of a cultural standpoint. Because winged entities exist in every culture across the globe. Looking at what that means, and bringing in shamans, bringing in imams, bringing in Catholic priests, bringing in rabbis,
We're available.
Bringing in everybody, and making part of the documentary more of this, kind of an ancient aliens approach of interviewing people, getting perspectives, and bringing those views together. And so that was the next phase of doing that. See, and we've even talked about going back, because originally the original cut of the documentary was over 4 hours long.
Oof.
And when Charlie and Matthew and I were looking at it for the first time, I'm like, we are not Peter Jackson. This is not Lord of the Rings. We cannot do a 4 hour. Nobody's going to sit through. I mean, if we want to cut it up and make it into a series, I mean, that's nobody's going to sit for 4.5 hours. So we cut it, and we kept cutting and cutting and cutting, and we finally got it to a manageable. I think it's like 75 minutes, which puts it right in the feature length category. So we finally got but you can imagine going from 4.5 hours to 1 hour and 15 minutes. A lot of stuff that didn't get put into a lot that got on the cutting room floor. So the other idea was to also do a director's cut and the special features and show the documentary the way that if in a perfect world, the way it would have aired, the way that everybody would see it. So that's kind of what we're moving towards right now. We've also, because there's a Facebook page for Dark Wings, there's a website which I'm in the process of updating and trying to get it back up and running. So the idea is we're coming upon November 15th, and December 15th is going to be the anniversary of the sightings and the collapse of the bridge. So I'm hoping to have at least one of those phases completed by that time period, so that people can start ordering the documentary and also again paying tribute to Charlie McCracken. That was one of the things I've already spoken with his widow. You know, a portion of everything that comes in from this point on is going to go to her and to his kids to help them and just to just to continue that friendship and that partnership that started at right now 30 years ago.
Mm. So it sounds like you are back on in a perfect time schedule, because if you could get it back up on those days or in between, or
That's the plan. We'll see. I had a little bit of a setback this past spring. I had some health problems myself, so I kind of was out of commission for about 3 months. So just now kind of getting back into a working groove and seeing things kind of fall into place the way that they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
I hate when I'm not in control of things, and I ended up not being in control for about 3 months.
Well, truthfully, we're really not in control of anything. We just think we are.
This is true, but I like lying to myself. So.
There you go.
Tell me lies. Tell me sweet little lies.
Exactly. So I mean, there's so much about Mothman. There's a Native American tie. Chief Cornstalk supposedly put a curse on the entire area. That's a whole segment digging into and unboxing all of that. The other thing that's really interesting is when you look at Cornstalk's curse, and you map out all the tragedies that have taken place in the town of Point Pleasant or around it. I mean, it's absolutely. And we do a timeline of the documentary. We start with the curse and we go forward all the way through, actually 2001, because we found something that was really, really interesting. The flight that flew into the Pentagon on 9/11.
Right.
In our research, we found FAA flight path maps. That flight was overtaken directly above Point Pleasant, West Virginia. That's where they make their turn and then fly back into the Pentagon.
Wow. That's interesting.
So there's all of these just really, really intricate details. Charles Manson stayed in an orphanage in Point Pleasant when he was young and had been abandoned. So there's all these just really weird back to Point Pleasant. I was in when we had just started working at the documentary, and I was actually the director of business development for a home health and a hospice agency at the time. And I was at a healthcare conference in Richmond, Virginia, and we got paired up. And I sat at the table with this marketing and business development person, and we're talking. And she asked me where I was from, and I was telling her. I said, "Well, where are you from?" She's like, "Oh," she goes, "This is this little town in West Virginia you've never heard of." I said, "Well, try me." And she's like, "It's Point Pleasant." And I'm like, "You've got to be kidding me." And she's like, "Yeah." And I told her the story. She's like, "My parents saw the Mothman back in the 60s. She's like, and so it's been this really kind of bizarre 6 degrees of separation since we went there. I was when I was a minister, I was at an ecumenical conference in northeastern West Virginia, up near Pennsylvania, and was sitting next to this Episcopal priest, and we're talking, and something came up about Point Pleasant, and his dad had been the civil engineer that had been called in to deal with the collapse of the Silver Bridge.
Wow.
And his dad was also supposed to have been on the airplane that the Marshall University football team was on that crashed and everyone died. His dad's luggage, he had one of the rolling suitcases, and the handle broke and his suitcase fell and everything fell, and his dad missed that flight. He said, otherwise my dad would have been on that flight. He said, so he'd had 2 ties to Point Pleasant, West Virginia, in that area. So it's been this, like I said, very, very interesting journey that is now on its 20th year. We started in 2003 working on this. So I've been talking about Mothman, researching Mothman. Lon Strickler, a very good friend of mine, very big in the cryptid world, Phantoms and Monsters Radio, Phantoms and Monster website. He has been tracking winged entities in the Chicago O'Hare Airport area for about the past decade, and he's got hundreds and hundreds of sightings that have been going on there in that area since about 2014.
So, in your personal opinion, what do you think the Mothman really is? Because there's just so many. You can go so many directions with this. Putting you on the spot.
Oh, if you had asked me that question 20 years ago, I would say demonic, based on the eyewitness accounts and things like that. I am the first to admit that I like to think I've evolved. I like to think I keep an open mind. I'm not so sure that that's the case. I think what we're dealing with here is something not of this world. First of all, it is, I believe, a higher dimensional existence, dimensional entity. One of the things that and I was guilty of this, going off of the one main physical description, the red eyes. Red. When we hear red eyes, we automatically go demonic. It has to be evil, and that is just that's our lens that we're focusing through. That's the way we've been taught. That's the way every horror film. The bad guy, the demon, the red eyes, things like that. A lot of these entities that are being seen now, some have glowing blue eyes, some have glowing green eyes, yellow eyes. I told Lon on one of his shows, and I just did a show last week, and I said the same thing. I said, glowing green eyes, maybe they're Irish. I don't know. Glowing red eyes, gets hung over. I mean, that's what again,
right.
That's fine. I don't know. Maybe the color of the eyes, for these beings is the same as skin color for human beings. Maybe it's their tribe, their ethnicity, their genus, ever how you want to do it. Maybe that's what differentiates them. I think what we're dealing with, and actually, I did have the distinct privilege of interviewing John Keel twice when we were doing the documentary. And Keel was one of the first to say, when he started out, he thought it was extraterrestrial. What he ended up thinking was, his term was ultra-terrestrial, that it was something that coexisted on this plane, but that only certain individuals could see it. And again, that was one of the things that I found very interesting about Mothman, is that when you start looking at supernatural and paranormal activity, almost every other occurrence, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, poltergeist, Bigfoot, there's pictures. As out of focus and as crappy as they may be, there's something. There's footprints. There's all those things. Only recently have there started being images of these winged entities.
Right.
Point Pleasant was very, very unique in that everything about it was just the word of mouth, just the eyewitness reports. There was no photograph, there was no video footage, there was nothing like that. These were just people coming forward. And I will have to say this: those people that were coming forward, yes, you had the 4 teenagers. But the other eyewitnesses were doctors, they were lawyers, they were police officers, they were school teachers, they were people in the community that had a standing and had credibility and had recognition. And they were all seeing the same thing. Like I said, over 100 eyewitness reports from multiple counties, some of them coming in at the same time. So you really have to take those eyewitness reports and those accounts, and you have to really give some credence to them. You have to, even if you take it with a grain of salt, you have to take it with a grain of say these are not people. And this, I will say this too, and I know we're running out of time, and I apologize. Right? When I start talking Mothman, though, I could go on for 2 hours or 3 hours, or obviously
that's why we want you.
Obviously, we want you based on the original cut of the documentary. You look at these individuals that had these sightings, and when we came to them to get their stories, they didn't want to talk about it. They weren't ready to jump in front of a camera and tell their story. As a matter of fact, Roger Scarberry, Linda's husband, and both of them have since passed. I think Roger passed. I said that, and then I have to double. Now I'm double guessing myself. I know Linda did because I got the phone call the morning that she passed, and I'm pretty sure that Roger has. We actually begged Roger to let us come and film his testimony of the eyewitness, and we told him we would even leave the tape with him. We would leave the film, but we thought it was important that his version of the account be documented, and that he could do with what he wanted.
Mhm.
He wanted to do it, and he flat out refused. He would not go on camera and talk about it. It took us 3 to 4 months to get Linda Scarberry to even come on camera and tell her story. And when she did, we actually took her back to the original site of the eyewitness report. And I was driving, and she was in the back seat. She was with her daughter and son-in-law. Charlie was in the passenger seat. And I watched her literally just kind of go from this, adult woman sitting upright to slowly leaning down and holding herself and being terrified. And then when we got to the first sighting, we had to coax her out of the car. She was crying. She was shivering. And there's actually a scene in the documentary where Charlie shot me and her just walking in the perimeter of what's now the county fairgrounds. And what I'm doing is she and I are just talking about nothing. I'm just trying to get her to open back up and just become comfortable again. And then we get her on camera giving her story. But it took that shoot in and of itself, that interview probably took 2-3 hours just to get her comfortable talking about what she saw again. What these people saw impacted them permanently, and it impacted them in a very negative way. Most of them had failed marriages multiple times, drug addiction, alcoholism, all of these things that impacted their lives after this event. And those were things that had not been evident in their life prior to that. So there's all of these different facets and different angles of looking at the story of Mothman, especially there in Point Pleasant. And then there's been sightings of these winged entities, Chernobyl, World Trade Center, 9/11, collapse of a bridge in the Midwest. Again, like I said, in Wise County, Texas. We were actually following that story very closely when we shot the documentary because we were intrigued because Wise County, Texas had been having a lot of natural disasters, a lot of fires, a lot of things like that. But it's also the home of Aurora, Texas, which is where many say the very first UFO crash took place in 1897, 50 years ago. So there's, again, this tie to that. So when you start getting into the Mothman lore and mythology, there are so many roads you can go down.
A lot of rabbit holes.
A lot of rabbit holes, yes.
Well, thank you, Travis. It's been a pleasure. We definitely have to have you back.
Yeah.
And we'll leave you alone for a little bit so you could get going on that project so that we could actually see it.
Not a problem. I will do my best to get you guys a screening copy once I get everything finished.
Ooh.
Oh, yes.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
But no, anytime that you would love to have me back, I am always available. It has been a great pleasure. And maybe we could even get Matthew to come on. I've been trying.
That'd be awesome to have both of you. Yeah.
To get a different perspective because everybody's heard my stories for over
Right.
20 years now. I've been doing it, and Matthew's done some interviews early on. But I talked to him on last week when we played golf, and he's all about telling his perspective, what it was like shooting the documentary, what it was like researching it. So I think that's an interesting approach that we have.
Next time we should bring cousin primo Matthew. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Nice meeting
Thank you guys very much. I'm looking forward to being back on. Thank you both very much. It has been my distinct pleasure.
Same. Thank you, Moongirl. Thank you, our audience, following us. If you have any questions or any comments and you cannot reach Travis directly, you could always write to us and we'll send it to him for sure. Thank you. Many blessings. And again, we love you. Bye.